So what happens when centuries of religious faith crash head-on into the modern world of science and reason? Today, we're going to dive into the revolutionary answer from a man who's been called the father of modern liberal theology, a guy who tried to rescue faith by looking not to the heavens but within ourselves.
All right, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll set the stage and see just how bad things had gotten for Christianity. Then we'll look at a couple of early attempts to fix things, and from there, we'll unpack Friedrich Schleiermacher's radical solution and see why it still matters so much today. So, picture this. It's the late 18th century. The Enlightenment is in full swing, and the very foundations of Christian belief are just cracking under this full-scale intellectual assault, and it was coming from all sides.
First up, you've got the historians. Scholars like Samuel Reimarus started poking holes in the Bible, arguing that, hey, maybe key parts of this aren't literal history. Maybe they were actually, inventions by the disciples to get a new religion off the ground. And you can imagine, that was a devastating blow to the Bible's credibility.
Then, as if that wasn't enough, in come the scientists. They're armed with Isaac Newton's physics, and they're saying the universe operates according to these fixed, unchangeable laws. So, supernatural miracles? By definition, those violate the laws of nature. In a perfect, clockwork universe, they just seemed impossible.
And finally, for the knockout punch, you have the philosophers. Thinkers like David Hume and Gotthold Lessing basically said, look, you can't use some one-time historical event, even something as huge as the resurrection, to logically prove an eternal, universal truth. The math just doesn't add up. It really seemed like faith was destined for the dustbin of history.
Okay, so in response to this crisis, two of the absolute greatest minds of the era stepped up. They tried to rescue religion, not by fighting reason, but by making faith compatible with it. But here's the catch. In trying to make faith logical, their solutions ended up feeling, kind of empty.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because you basically had two options on the table. On one side, you have Immanuel Kant. He said, religion is really all about morality. It's about what you do. Then you've got G.W.F. Hegel, who argued that religion is just a kind of philosophy. It's about what you know. But see the problem? In trying to save faith, they both kind of stripped it of what makes it unique, reducing it to either a rulebook or a textbook.
And this is where our protagonist, Friedrich Schleiermacher, enters the story. He was a theologian who had personally wrestled with these exact same doubts, and he came up with a third way. A revolution that turned away from rules and logic and instead looked inward.
To really get Schleiermacher, you have to look at his own life. It was this incredible journey through intense faith, then deep skepticism, and finally, a profound rediscovery. He was shaped by this deep piety from his youth, but also by the Enlightenment's toughest questions, which threw him into a real personal crisis.
His crisis was deep. Listen to this. He writes a letter to his own father and confesses that he can't accept the core doctrines he was taught anymore, that Christ was literally God and that his death paid for our sins. But here's the thing, even as those beliefs collapsed, he didn't lose his faith entirely. And that struggle is what led him to his big breakthrough.
So, here it is. This is the crucial move. Schleiermacher says the true home of religion isn't in what you know, like Hegel said, or what you do, like Kant said. No, it's in a third place, what you feel. And he zeroes in on this universal human experience he called the feeling of absolute dependence, that immediate gut-level awareness that our very existence relies on something bigger than us, something beyond the world. For Schleiermacher, that feeling, that is the consciousness of God.
Okay, so think about the implications here. If faith doesn't start with the book or a historical fact, but with this inner feeling, what does that do to everything else? Well, it means every single core Christian idea has to be completely rebuilt from the inside out.
And this table just shows you how massive the shift was. Look at this. Who is Christ? He's not some metaphysical God-man anymore. He's the one perfect human who had an absolutely perfect God consciousness and salvation. It's not a cosmic payment for sin. It's about us receiving a share of that perfect God consciousness through the community he started. The church itself isn't a building that holds correct doctrines. It's the living community that keeps that influence going. He had this wonderful analogy to explain how this works. He said Christ's appearance was relatively supernatural. Now think of it like a new planet just suddenly appearing in our solar system. Its origin is a mystery, a new creation. But once it's there, its gravitational pull on everything else is a completely natural process. He's saying Christ's perfect God consciousness was like that, a new creation whose influence now spreads naturally through all of humanity.
So what does this all mean for us today? Why does this guy from the 1800s still matter? Because Schleiermacher essentially created a blueprint, a framework that was meant to declare a permanent truce in the war between faith and science.
And his blueprint was honestly brilliant in its simplicity. Step 1, ground faith not in historical facts that can be disproven, but in our inner experience, which can't. Step 2, redefine all those doctrines not as literal truths, but as the community's best description of that shared experience. And what's the result? You get this eternal covenant. Science gets the outside world, the objective stuff, and faith gets the inner world, the subjective stuff. They can finally stay in their own lanes and stop crashing into each other.
You really can't overstate his influence. He's called the father of modern liberal theology for a reason. He made personal experience, not some ancient dogma, the beating heart of faith for millions. He basically gave modern, educated people a way to hold on to their faith while still fully embracing science. And that shaped Christian thought for the next 200 years.
And that leaves us with this one big provocative question. In building this fortress for faith inside the human heart, safe from the attacks of science and history, did Schleiermacher accidentally create a new problem? Did he save Christianity, or did he risk its entire foundation by making it all about a purely subjective feeling? That's a debate that modern theology is still having right now.